Revelation 14 is one of the most misread chapters in the entire Bible. Most people who touch it at all read it like this: end time symbolism, future events, mysterious imagery, the 144,000 as a literal census, the three angels as cosmic announcers, the harvest as generic final judgment, Babylon as Rome or the modern world or some future global empire, and then people argue forever about what each symbol means. Why? Because they're trying to interpret imagery without the system the imagery is operating inside. And that's the real problem. The chapter isn't unreadable, it's just being read without architecture. And once you have the architecture, the arguing starts to collapse. Not because every question disappears, but because the chapter stops reading like mysterious symbolism and starts reading like structured covenant procedure. That's the difference. So let me show you what Revelation 14 actually is. And first thing we need to talk about is context, because that matters here more than in most passages. By chapter 14, Revelation has already run through the seals and the trumpets. The seals opened the covenant lawsuit. The trumpets escalated warning. Mercy was still speaking. Judgment was building, but the full weight hadn't landed yet. Then chapter 13 introduced the beast system: counterfeit governance, false worship, economic control, pressure against the covenant people. So by the time you reach chapter 14, the question isn't what weird symbol comes next. The question is, where does Yahuwah stand in relation to all of this? And what happens now? And chapter 14 answers that in three movements: the Lamb on Zion, the three messengers, and the two harvests. That's the chapter. Now let's walk it through the covenant architecture. Layer 1, the temple pattern. So the chapter opens with the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who have his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. The temple layer reads this immediately. Mount Zion isn't just a location marker, it's sacred governance mountain. It's a sacred governance mountain. Presence mountain, a kingship mountain, a covenant center mountain. And that matters because chapter 13 just showed you the beast's counterfeit rule. Now chapter 14 opens with the real center: two governance claims, two systems, and two throne patterns. Counterfeit rule in chapter 13, covenant rule in chapter 14. That's not random sequencing, that's structural contrast. Then the forehead mark matters too. In chapter 13, the beast marks its people, hand or forehead, belonging to the counterfeit system. In chapter 14, the 144,000 have the name of the Lamb and the Father on their foreheads. So again, the contrast is deliberate. Not just two groups, but two ownership claims, two rule systems, and two identity settings, or two identity ceilings. That's temple logic, because temple logic always asks, whose space is this? Whose presence governs here? Who belongs to this order? And the 144,000 matter too, because this isn't best read as a random census chart. In the framework, 144 carries priestly remnant and covenant governance logic. 12 by 12, full covenant body in ordered standing before the Lamb. So the temple layer is doing exactly what it should. Before anything else happens, the chapter establishes true governance center and true covenant people standing in it. And that's the point. The Modim cycle, layer 2. Let's talk about sacred time. And this is where people flatten the chapter badly. The harvest imagery here isn't generic farm language, it's covenant calendar language. And that matters, because the Modim cycle governs sacred time in procedural order. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shabbat, the trumpets, atonement, and Sukkot. So by the time you reach chapter 14 or Revelation chapter 14, the trumpet sequence has already run. Warning has been issued. The cycle is moving towards separation, cleansing, and harvest resolution. So the harvests in this chapter aren't loose metaphors, they sit in covenant time. Grain harvest, grape harvest, so 2 harvests, 2 outcomes, 2 covenant functions. The grain harvest carries righteous gathering logic, first fruits maturing toward full ingathering. The grape harvest carries pressing logic, wrath logic, removal logic. What refused return now moves into crushing separation. That's not John inventing dark poetry, that's appointed time structure. And that's why the chapter puts them in sequence, because the calendar itself runs in sequence. Harvest is governed, not improvised. So the Modim layer here tells you the timing isn't decorative. The chapter is moving through covenant time toward cleansing and final separation. That's why the harvest imagery lands where it does. Now the Sinai Covenant lawsuit, layer 3. Then the 3 messengers appear, and this is one of the clearest legal sections in the chapter if you stop reading it like floating apocalypse symbolism. The first messenger proclaims the everlasting good news. Fear Yahuwah, give him glory, worship the Creator, because the hour of his judgment has come. That's summons language. The second messenger says Babylon is fallen. That is verdict language. The third messenger says those who worship the beast and receive his mark will drink the wine of Yahuwah's wrath. That is sentence language, and that sequence matters. Summons, verdict, sentence. That's lawsuit structure. Not 3 disconnected speeches, not random cosmic declarations, but formal legal announcement. So the covenant standard is declared, the guilt system is named, and the consequence is pronounced. That's exactly what the Sinai lawsuit layer should look like at this point in Revelation, because by now the warnings have already gone out, the evidence has already been gathered, the beast system has already been exposed. So by chapter 14 isn't introducing the problem, it's moving the lawsuit into public declaration. That's why the chapter feels so sharp. The court is no longer only warning, it's declaring. Now let's talk about the Eden Ark, layer 4. Because now this is the story direction layer. The Eden Ark runs garden, rebellion, exile, guarded access, and restoration. So what is Babylon doing here? Babylon isn't just a city name puzzle. Babylon is a mature exile system. And that matters because it's the accumulated order of rebellion, bondage, false worship, corruption, and displacement that stands against covenant restoration. So when the messenger says Babylon is fallen, that's not just political commentary, that's Eden Ark movement. The exile structure is being broken. The thing that held people in bondage, the thing that organized life against covenant order, the thing that matured rebellion into civilization scale corruption is now under collapse. Then the 2 harvests reinforce that. The grain harvest is in gathering, the righteous gathered in, and the grape harvest is removal. What refuses restoration gets separated out by force. So the chapter isn't just saying judgment is coming, it's saying the story is turning. Exile order is being brought down, restoration direction is becoming dominant. That's Eden Ark logic. And that's why Babylon's fall matters so much. It's not one more event, it's a collapse of exile order on the way to restored dwelling. Now, Jubilee, let's move to layer 5, the Jubilee release pattern. So this one matters because Babylon isn't just anti-truth, it's anti-release. That's the issue. Babylon is a system that holds people economically, spiritually, politically, and covenantally. It's anti-return, anti-inheritance, and anti-reset. So when Babylon is declared fallen, the Jubilee layer hears that immediately, because Jubilee means return, release, and reset. The covenant people are gathered, the oppressive system is broken, what held people in bondage loses its claim. That's exactly what is starting to happen here. The grain harvest is the positive Jubilee movement, return, gathering, and covenant people being brought in. The grape harvest is the hard side of Jubilee logic. It's forced reset, judicial release, and what wouldn't yield voluntarily gets broken by judgment. That matters because Jubilee isn't soft sentiment, it's restoration with real consequences for false structures. So chapter 14 isn't just a harvest chapter, it's a Jubilee pressure chapter. Babylon falls, the people of Yahuwah are gathered, the oppressive systems moves toward irreversible collapse. That's Jubilee operating at apocalyptic scale. Now let's move into pulse mathematics, layer 6. So the biggest marker here is 144. The 144,000 stand with the Lamb on Zion before the harvest sequence unfolds. That matters because in the framework, 144 carries sealing, priestly remnant, and full covenant governance body logic. And the sequencing matters too. The remnant are identified before the final harvest resolution unfolds. That's not random placement, that's covenant measurement. The people of the Lamb are marked in position before separation fully executes. Then there's the winepress measurement. Blood flows for 1600 stadia. Now, this is one of those places where people either get sloppy or overbuild. So let's keep this careful, because what we can say cleanly is this. The number is precise on purpose. The judgment is measured. The judgment isn't approximate. The legal completeness of the action matters. So that's enough. And the pulse layer here isn't there to turn the chapter into number games. It's there to show that remnant sealing and judgment completeness are both measured realities inside the chapter. And that's the point. Now let's go to layer 7, the axis. This is the interpretive layer. The primary axis here is axis 10. Judgment, Gehenna, end of the age. And that needs to be named cleanly because this chapter is one of the strongest axis 10 passages in the entire book. But here's the key. Axis 10 isn't random destruction. It's covenant judgment reaching final legal form. And that matters because the chapter isn't chaos breaking loose. It's judicial sequence reaching harvest resolution. The three messengers are Axis 10 in declaration form. The two harvests are Axis 10 in execution form. The summons goes out, the verdict is declared, the sentence is announced, and the separation unfolds. That's Axis 10 doing exactly what it does. Now, yes, other axes are clearly present here. Axis 12 in the sealed remnant, Axis 9 in Babylon as corrupt economic order, Axis 4 in the Lamb standing on Zion as true covenant rule, but Axis 10 governs the chapter because judgment is now reaching its legal and covenantal climax. That's the center. So let's bring this all together now and go over what Revelation 14 actually is, because it's a pivot chapter. The beast has been introduced, the pressure is high, the counterfeit system is visible, and now the covenant system responds. So let's walk through each of the 7 layers again really quickly. The temple, the Lamb stands on Zion, and the true governance center is established. Modim, the chapter moves in appointed time harvest logic, not random symbolism. Sinai, the 3 messengers announce summons, verdict, and sentence. Eden, Babylon's fall marks the collapse of exile order and the turn toward restoration. Jubilee, the righteous are gathered and the oppressive system moves into forced reset. Pulse, the 144,000 are sealed before harvest resolution, and the winepress judgment is measured in deliberate completeness. And the Axis 10, governs because the whole chapter is covenant judgment reaching final declarative and harvest form. So no, Revelation 14 isn't just mysterious end times imagery, it's the covenant operating system reaching a decisive legal phase. Structured, sequenced, and governed. And once you see that, the chapter stops floating. Not every question disappears, but the chapter becomes readable because the system is visible. And when the system's visible, the passage stops being chaos. And that's what the architecture teaches you to see. And that's exactly what the course teaches you to be able to do. Not just admire the symbols, but read the system they belong to. And that's the difference. The full course teaches you to read every passage through this architecture. So if you want to sign up, you can do so at school.com/undeniable truths. See you on the inside.